So, welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you're joining us today. We have a small but mighty group on Zoom. Really appreciate you all being here. As we get started in our webinar, I'd love for you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. So, asking you all to share your name, your preferred pronouns, your organization, if you're representing one today, and where in the world you are. Since we are an international organization, we tend to have folks from all over the world joining us on these calls. And I'm going to go ahead and dive in because we have a lot to cover today and a lot of good stories to share and a lot of amazing partners on the call that I want you to hear from as much as possible. So I'll begin and say my name is Stacy Garcia and my pronouns are she, her. I work for the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, and I'm based in Santa Cruz, California, in the United States. And for those of you who we haven't met yet, I wanted to introduce the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience for you if you're not already familiar with us. But we are a worldwide network that works with over 350 members in 65 countries across the world. Our members, including so many of you who are on the call right now, are historic sites, museums, parks, or memory initiatives that are all dedicated to this common purpose that we can use place and history to better understand our past and really engage folks in shaping what a more just and humane future looks like and encouraging people to be a part of that process. There are some common principles that unite us as members of the coalition, and that is to interpret history through sight, to engage the public in dialogue on pressing social issues that are related to your region, to invite the public to take action on those issues that are raised at your site, and to work collectively to preserve memory, promote truth, and pursue justice. So being part of the coalition means you're part of this learning network, trying to advance all of these initiatives together. And so much of what I share in our webinar today is very much thanks to members around the world who are sharing their practices and approaches so that we can learn and grow together. And if you're interested in membership, I'll send you a link afterwards and happy to chat with anyone about what that entails. But let's get to the purpose of our webinar today, which is to share some of the tools and stories and examples for making internal change in your organization that addresses some community barriers that may be at your organization. And we're going to do this by sharing some of the messy change-making processes. This is not like a linear process. There's a lot that we're learning as we're making changes. And we're really excited to share with you what we're learning through a cohort that we've been working with called Addressing the Silences. And this cohort has been meeting for over, let's say, a year and a half now. It's a 3-year-long project. This is a few of us who gathered in Austin at the very beginning. And the whole purpose of this project is to really help create more meaningful relationships in our respective communities. And this is a project that's funded through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. They've provided a wonderful grant for us to really dive into this together. There are 13 museums that are a part of this Addressing the Silences cohort. These are all museums that are members of the coalition and across the United States. Some are really big state-run institutions like the Illinois State Museum, and then some are really small institutions that are entirely volunteer-run like the Catoctin Historic Furnace Society. But all of us and all of the museums that are part of this project are part of it because they know that there's communities that have not been included in their organization in the past, and they're dedicated to building stronger relationships with those communities together. So that's really what binds us. And at the beginning of this process, we spent a lot of time reflecting on each organization's internal and community engagement practices. We did a lot of reflection work. Then we started to identify a community for which each of these sites wanted to engage more deeply. And you can learn more about that process in the first webinar we did in this series that talks about internal reflection. Then we had each of these museums think about a partner in the community that they'd really like to form a strong relationship with to start to change the collaboration. And so 13 community partners have also joined us in this cohort in this long process of change and collaboration. And we're so happy to have them as part of this group, working alongside the museums to make an internal change in their organization that leads to more collaboration and stronger relationships, and then an external change that involves more community members and more of the public in that change-making process. We have done 3 webinars to just kind of share the work we've done thus far, and I will follow up with all of you with a link to the recording for the first 2 webinars. The first on that internal reflection, the second on this idea of really building reciprocal relationships with museums and community partners and thinking about reciprocity, which is a important thread throughout this entire project. And this webinar today, which is the last in this series this summer, is about making change from the inside out. So once you've reflected, once you are starting to build a strong relationship, how do you make a change that really helps to support this partnership to flourish and to succeed, starting on the inside? We have a couple of partners that are part of the Addressing the Silences cohort on the call today, some who are going to be speaking to you and some who are participants on the call, which is wonderful. And I'm going to turn it to the folks who are going to be sharing their stories and their examples today to just briefly introduce their site and their organization and the community that they're really focused on in this work. And I'll start by first turning it to Jillian at the Michigan History Center.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jillian, and I'll be talking about the Michigan History Center's partnership today. The Michigan History Center is the steward of the state of Michigan's historic sites and collections. We run 13 sites across the state and have both an archaeological and museum division. We also run the state's historic marker program and are the convening organization for the Michigan Historical Commission and the Michigan Underground Railroad Commission. The MHC is over 100 years old and based in Lansing, Michigan. Our community focus is Michigan's Latinx community. Our partners are the Latino leaders for the enhancement of advocacy and development LEAD. And LEAD is a statewide nonprofit that deals with concerns of advocacy, civic engagement, and awareness. And yeah, I'm hearing an echo too. I saw Jade right in the chat. And then we are also working with Dr. Delia Fernandez-Jones. That's better. Dr. Delia Fernandez-Jones, who is the Associate Dean for Equity, Justice, and Faculty Affairs at and an Associate Professor of History at Michigan State University. And Delia specializes in studying the placemaking practices of Michigan's Mexicans, Tejanos, and Puerto Ricans. Yeah, that's better. Thank you, Stacy. Sorry about that a little bit. I was hearing my reverb, so good. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Jillian. Sorry about the echo. I think I'll just make sure that folks are on mute while somebody else is talking, and apologies that we're having some echoing. The next group I want to go to share is the Refugee Collective, and I'll ask Christina to share.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Jones with the Refugee Collective. We're a nonprofit in Austin, Texas. We've been around for 15 years. Previously, we were known as Multicultural Refugee Coalition, which is far too much to say. But we have 2 social enterprises within this nonprofit. One is an organic farm, and one is a textile manufacturing studio. both with the mission of refugee livelihoods. We employ refugees at both the textile studio and the organic farm, as well as practicing farm to fiber initiatives, regenerative agriculture, food access for more of our refugee community throughout the city, and wraparound support for our refugee team members, meaning making sure that everybody has health insurance, from anywhere from health insurance to like making sure your kid has a laptop for school. So yeah, that's the main mission, is refugee livelihoods in our city. We are partnered with the Elisabet Ney Museum, which, Jade, I don't know if you wanted to hop on and say anything, but I'm happy to explain the Ney. Elisabet Ney Museum is a beautiful historic house museum in central Austin. It's been around since 1893, I think. And she was a sculptor who immigrated from Germany, and we are so thrilled to be in partnership with them.
Thanks, Christina, and really appreciate you being on the call and sharing this too. It's so nice to have community partners and museum partners sharing the work that we're doing together. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second because I think I figured out the echo problem. So give me 1 second and I will share again. And hopefully that solves this. Apologies for the technical difficulties. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Emily next, who's our last partner who's sharing on the call for the Bush Square Museums.
Hey everybody, my name's Emily O'Connor. I'm the museum site coordinator at Brush Square Museums. We are two small house museums that sit on some city parkland here in Austin, Texas. Brush Square Museums is comprised of the O. Henry Museum and the Susanna Dickinson Museum. The O. Henry Museum was the home of short story author O. Henry, who was famous for writing short stories such as The Gift of the Magi, The Last Leaf, several other short stories with a twist ending. And he lived in this home before he became popular as a writer, sort of in his formative years. And also the Susanna Dickinson Museum. Susanna Dickinson was a survivor of the Battle of the Alamo and also known as the messenger of the Battle of the Alamo, because she broke the news to Sam Houston and his troops in Gonzales that the Alamo had fallen. So we touch on some literary history, some Texas history, some local history here. And we are partnering with the Living History Foundation, which was founded by Alan Mack. And the type of work that he does is he aims to bring the hobby of living history, the method of interpretation that is living history, to younger folks of color, folks who otherwise wouldn't have the resources to be able to participate in this method of teaching and learning history. And we are working together to build some community with the adolescents and teens in some of the more underserved sections of our community, specifically the Eastern Crescent over on the east side, just on the other side of I-35, which has several historically redlined districts. And there's really a focus on mental health with our efforts and creating connection and community. And I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Emily. And thanks to all the partners who are on the call. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to share some of the internal change frameworks and tools and things that we shared in this cohort to help each of these sites and community partners kind of unpack what an internal change might look like in the museum. And I will say that although I am the voice sharing this was really informed and developed by so many people in the cohort who have helped me learn along the way and helped us learn together. So it's really thanks to all the partners who are part of this cohort. After I share some tools and frameworks, I'm going to ask some of the partners on the call to share some of the stories and lessons learned and how they actually put this into practice and like, what did that actually look like? And then a heads up to you all on the call, I am going to ask you all to participate in a few activities throughout the session. So thinking about some of these prompts that we've shared and thinking about that and what that might look like for your organization. So let's jump to it. The first part of how we thought about making internal change in an organization was really about identifying barriers for that community of focus in the organization and starting with really getting clear about what those barriers are. And this is a little bit different from some of the approaches that museums usually take. You know, oftentimes when an organization or an institution is trying to partner with a new community or a new community group, we jump straight to that like big, shiny, wonderful project we want to do together without doing some of the internal work in the organization that's really going to set that partnership up to succeed and flourish to its best ability. So part of the work in the Addressing the Silences project was to start from the inside and then work outward. So each of the museums and their community partner took an inside look in the behind the scenes practices of the museum to really start to think about what are some practices or policies or procedures that are actually really barriers for that community to fully participate and to be part of the work of the museum. So as a cohort, the first thing we did was we brainstormed together some of the activities that the museum and a community partner could do to get that inside look. And so some of these things were inviting the community partner to join a museum a staff meeting, start to kind of see how they interact with each other, what are some of those conversations. Other things we suggested were going to an event at the museum together, but then debriefing with whoever was leading that event to kind of understand how did that event come into fruition and start to talk through it together. So there's lots of different activities you could do with a community partner to give them that behind the scenes inside look. But the important thing here was to really have the museum kind of learn from the community partner, learn a different perspective about their work, and have the partner kind of learn more about the inner workings of the museum. Another tool that we shared with the cohort is this tool called journey mapping. And I'll give you a very brief version of this and send the slides to you later, and happy to share more about it if anybody wants to dive in. But journey mapping is essentially a tool to really help you understand how a specific group of people or a community is experiencing your institution from the moment they find out about you to their experience with you to after they leave. And the whole purpose of this tool is to really identify what are the interactions that your institution is getting right that are leading to really positive experiences, and what are the interactions that your institution is not hitting the mark on that maybe lead to disengagement or less of a strong relationship. And a few quick steps, you know, if you're wanting to do this kind of process, is to first really get clear about the group of people that you're trying to build a stronger relationship with, to identify that group. And in journey mapping, it's often better if you go through this process with that group as well. The second thing is to define your end goal. So ultimately, like, how are you hoping this relationship will grow? What are the things that you really want to see out of this relationship, and how do you want this to flourish? And then we suggest creating a current state map. So thinking about all of the interactions with this community or this group, how those interactions are happening over time as they currently are. So what are the different interactions or touch points that you're having with this group of people? And are those experiences really positive experiences, or are those negative experiences? And when you do that over time, you can see some of the interactions that are maybe like a little less favorable that you may need to improve and change to bring up. So you can work on improving those specific interactions, or just re-envisioning the process entirely and thinking about what could a great interaction from the moment this group finds out about your organization to their experience with you to afterwards, and what does that look like? After this call, I'll email you all a template that we shared with the group to help them map this out. And this essentially kind of maps out different touch points or the experiences that you're having, and where those experiences positive and negative, and it helps you kind of see the specific kind of interactions that you may want to improve over time. So this was just one of the tools that we shared with the group to kind of think about barriers in their institutions and like what are some of the internal practices or policies that might help address those barriers. But first, you got to identify the barriers at the beginning. So I want to ask Jillian from the Michigan History Center to just share a story or example about the barriers that you found in the museum and what might have helped you kind of identify those barriers.
Yeah, so we had the unlucky or maybe lucky for the project experience of having barriers that were pretty evident from the beginning of our project. We have a very close relationship with the 12 federally recognized tribes in Michigan that has grown over the last 10, 15 years. We have a pretty close community with, or pretty close relationship with Michigan's African American community. And that really reflected the way we interpret history and develop projects, gearing towards co-creation, don't tell about us without us sort of thinking. But the museum had almost no relationship with the Latino community in Michigan, and let alone a meaningful relationship. We didn't even have a surface level one, and that showed. We have hardly any content or stories related to Latinx history in our collections and exhibits. Staff does not have any expertise in Latino history outside of the major national themes of migration and agriculture. And we had no awareness of who would even be open to partnering with us from the Latino community. So we started out with doing, some informal dinners. We went to some community events like a golf outing that our eventual partner lead was hosting. And then we also realized that the lack of awareness was also on the community standpoint. There really wasn't an awareness of the Michigan History Center and the statewide resources for history in general within the Latino community, even among cultural professionals. We connected with a lot of people whose life work was working in public history, working as librarians, historians themselves, but they were really not aware of the Michigan History Center. And if they were, just basically that we were the state history museum and nothing else. But there was a willingness to grow the relationship. There was a lot of openness that we found with our community partners, which was wonderful. And there was sort of a need that was growing with engagement with youth. Both of our partners, Lead and Delia, work with youth, and they're very interested in offering sort of professional development opportunities for young people. And they were really interested in how we could help them expose young Latinos to careers in public history. So we decided to focus on building the knowledge of Latinx history within our staff, so that we could start, co-creating with these communities. We wanted to build awareness of the MHC with our key stakeholders in the Latino community. And we wanted to create, sort of as a culmination of this internal change, a funded internship program to help expose youth who were interested in history as a career path.
Thanks so much, Jillian. And, I think with all of the institutions that are part of this cohort, when you're like, you open up the insides of your museum and you're like, all right, community partner, like, tell us what's wrong. There's a lot of vulnerability in doing that, right? And opening up some of the internal workings of your museum for criticism or for new eyes on it. So just thanks for being, everybody in this cohort for being vulnerable and thinking about like, how can we make this better? And what does that change? And also for the partners who are on this call, being brave to share, here are some things and barriers that I'm recognizing that I want you to be aware of. Takes a lot of bravery on their part too. Wanted to ask the folks on the call, and you can just unmute yourself if you'd like, but we shared some behind the scenes activities that you can do to kind of understand the inner workings of an institution and really invite partners to have that inside look. Curious if you all have any other ideas or recommendations for ways you could invite partners to see some of those internal workings in your organization. And feel free to unmute or put your ideas in the chat, but would love to get some more ideas from you all around what are some of those activities you can invite partners to join you in.
I'll say that we've had at the Elisabet Ney and the Refugee Collective, first staff from Elisabet Ney came and took a tour of our organic farm in Elgin. And then one of I think the most impactful things is that we had our refugee team members from the textile studio visit the Ney. And what was really kind of lovely and sweet about that is that I believe that that was the first museum that our team members, and they're all women, had been to in the US, and they loved it. You could tell how meaningful that going to those spaces were for both the groups.
Yeah, just being in those space makes a huge difference and you get to experience things differently. Any other suggestions from anyone on the call around activities you could do together to really get to know an organization? And I see Elizabeth said, find out what the partner organization is doing and make sure you attend their meetings. Yeah, absolutely. Attending their events and those meetings, you get to kind of see like, what are the interactions like? How are these meetings structured or not structured? And what does that look like? It definitely reveals a lot. Great suggestion. I will keep us moving on, but if you have other ideas, please pop them in the chat so we can continue to learn from each other as we go through the webinar. So the
Sorry,
next,
Stacy.
yeah,
Oh, I just had one other thing
Jillian,
about the
go
dinners,
for it.
just for kind of an anecdote from us. I know, like one of the first dinners we had, we had reached out to a member of LEAD, just kind of saying, "Hey, we've heard from our other partner, Dahlia, that you might be interested in working with us." And she's like, "Great, let's go to dinner tonight." So I think that's like a very good uh, lesson too, from sort of getting to know in these sort of behind the scene activities. Informal works really well, but just kind of, be open that it might start before you think it would. In my life, I like to plan 2 weeks in advance. So, our community partners kind of what you said just kind of struck that inspiration of that story, because your community partners may have a different sort of planning schedule and be a little bit more open to just kind of diving right in and doing something right away, which was very fun. And sometimes you're more open when you don't have time to plan and ruminate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like everyone, anytime you're collaborating with anyone, that flexibility muscle, you gotta work on that. Everybody has to work on that, right? So good point, Julian. So after we asked all of the partners to kind of get clear around the barriers that they're seeing, we then asked them to think about really getting clear and defining the outcomes that they wanted to have as a result. So whenever you're trying to make change, it's always helpful to define outcomes, which essentially is like, what do you want to be different? What do you want to change? And getting clear on this, especially if you're working with a partner on this change, is extremely helpful. So the way that we've been defining outcomes is outcomes are the benefits or changes for individuals or populations during or after participating in activities. So outcomes are not about like what you're going to do or the specific policy change you're making. It's about the impact that that has on the people it's intended for, right? And so it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but we invited the Kira Collective, who are our evaluation partners on this project, to join us to kind of unpack that for the group. And they shared this helpful graphic that we wanted to share with you all, which is helpful in just kind of thinking about outcomes and what types of outcomes could result. So really thinking about a group of people experiencing your work or your organization, and what is that change in understanding that you're desiring, that change in feelings or beliefs. Maybe it's an increase in trust or in feeling welcome. The changes in social engagement. So maybe it's increased connection with each other, changes in skills, well-being, or behavior. So again, this helps get at not what you're going to do, but what you want people to feel or experience or understand as a result of that change that you're making. They also shared this helpful questionnaire here about just again kind of unpacking like after you make this change, how is your staff or community gonna feel different? What do you really want them to feel as a result? Or what kind of skills are you hoping to build in your staff by making this change? Or what kinds of changes in behavior of your staff are you seeking after you make this change? So these questions really helped our group understand that a little bit better. And just a few tips on defining clear outcomes. It's really helpful when they're people-centered, when they're people-specific, when you're really clear about who you're trying to design this outcome for. They help define how a group of people is going to change or grow over time. And again, they really describe that change in knowledge, understanding, beliefs, and skills and feelings as a result of what you do, but not what you do. And then, as always, a short, clear sentence is really helpful for everyone to be on the same page. And if you actually want to measure whether or not you succeeded in that, that is also really important to have that statement be succinct. When we were working with the Cura Collective on this, we gave the folks on the call a couple options for thinking about outcomes. One is just to simply like define what's going to be different. So thinking about all the people that are involved in this change, whether that was museum staff or community partners or the community of focus, but what do you want to be different? So sometimes starting a sentence of the community partner will, ... and filling in the blanks helps to do that. Another approach, which some of the organizations took, was to create a kind of mini theory of change around this. So thinking about like, ultimately, like what's the impact that we're trying to create? What's that ultimate change in feeling or beliefs or skills or behavior that we're trying to create? And what are some short-term or mid-term outcomes that are going to get us closer to that? There's many ways to think about outcomes, but for us, this is an important part of this process. And I wanted to share a few outcomes that folks in the group identified. So the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society said, the community partner will increase trust and involvement with the museum and each other. The Illinois State Museum said the community of focus will feel and see their identities celebrated. That's a misspelling, sorry about that. That historic Stagville, that the community of focus will know how they can participate in the museum operations and projects and how to communicate their ideas directly with museum leadership. And then the John Dickinson Plantation said the community of focus will feel an increased sense of connection to the site and that they are a trusted resource and ally to the museum. So those are some really clear, specific examples of what changes they want folks to feel or think or know how to do differently. Christina and Emily, I'm going to ask both of you to kind of share some of the outcomes that you identified and how that changed over time, right? Because you can sometimes start with an outcome that you think you're going to work on, and then you're like, actually, this is what we want to work on. So would love for you to each share how you thought about outcomes and any perspective on that. And I'll start with Christina first.
I know you're talking directly to me when you say you thought you were going to start with one thing and then you ended with another. So I kind of will start with initially we thought our obstacle was understanding the policies and processes for sharing the museum information and events and various things with the lack of translation and the barrier of language and understanding, right? And that was definitely, I was going hardcore on that. I was thinking we need to have a physical translation of everything that's in this museum for everyone. And while yes, we definitely want to have tools to offer folks that are non-English speaking, I think it took a mind shift for me of the refugees that are in this country have had to figure out the tools that help them every single day. I've seen this in our team. They know how to Google Translate like that. You need to give them a little bit more credit for the things that they've already had to figure out. Now, certainly, again, you still need to have the tools ready, but focusing on having like a piece of paper in Pashto is really not the vibe. That's not where we really need to go. And so fortunately, our director, who has been doing this for 15 years, was able to kind of turn us around and say, yes, we want the tools, but also we really want to make sure that non-English speakers feel welcome when they walk in the doors of the Elisabet Ney Museum or any institution, right? And so we had to really kind of look inward and ask ourselves and ask our refugee team members, what does that look like to you? And as kind of a side to this, when I initially said one of the things that we did was engaging with our textile team, went to the Elisabet Ney Museum, and that was a lovely, wonderful experience. And then we also then went to another really large museum in Austin, and it was for Annie Albert's exhibit, which she's a renowned textile artist. So of course our seamstresses, that team, were really interested, but it is a really large museum. It covers quite a bit of different art exhibits. So we walk into this big museum, and a couple of our refugee team members walked up really close to a physical loom that was right in the middle of the room. And one of them like kind of outreached her hand to maybe touch the loom, and a docent came flying in and was like, keep your hands off. And we were like, oh gosh, oh geez, I'm okay, gosh, okay. And so it really kind of freaked our team members out, but they're adult women. They're like, okay, it's cool, it's cool. But that really struck us because then our CEO found that docent a little bit later and was just like, hey, just wanted to let you know that these are refugee women. They are from all different countries. They don't speak this language. They're also textile artists. So, sorry that happened, but also, that was kind of intense. And that particular docent just was like, okay, bye. Just didn't really register. And so that really stuck with us in just the overall overarching experience and heart feeling of when you walk into a space and it's not your native language, how do you feel welcome? And so, Stacey, should we do the video now or later? Okay, so
now or later, whatever you'd like.
I think let's do it now because it's pertinent. So we literally went around to not everybody in our organizations, but several, to ask what does welcome mean to them. And here it is.
Welcome means sharing your enthusiasm about a niche topic with another person because they'll be interested in it too.
What welcome means to me would be something like big smiles, just like a cozy environment, maybe interactive activities, board games, and yeah, I think a lot of friendly energy.
I try to welcome people and to create a welcoming atmosphere by smiling. I think the first impression is very important. By introducing myself and also introducing the people around me to this person, so that the person feels comfortable and included. And I would ask questions, what their name is, what their interests are, so that I could maybe go and talk about that. People love talking about themselves, so that's what I would do to make everybody feel welcomed, and also to encourage everybody around me to smile and be welcoming to them.
Hi everyone, what welcome means to me is to drop what we're doing unless we're speaking to another guest and welcome our new guest to the Elisabet Ney Museum. It's really essential to find out what their interests are. For example, some people might like to just have some quiet time. Some people might want a short intro and a guided tour, but some people might want a tour. So it's really important to assess their needs at first. My goal personally is to make sure that everybody leaves with a big smile on their face and inspired by Elisabet Ney's life and art, and that they'll come back and bring a friend and loved one.
Okay. I think to me, welcome is a beginning. I feel welcome when I enter a space and people actually see me as a person. I feel that when people look me in the eye, they smile, it's an instant beginning of maybe communication, getting to know a new space. When I enter a space and people kind of connect with me, and I feel that this is a way I can start. I mean, there are endless possibilities when you feel welcomed. And to me, being welcomed is people seeing me for who I am and trying to connect with me.
Welcomes make me feel safe and feel loved and happy. Karaoke, khalarasui, Riucha Fashalini Naman or Matlata, the Chita Manafashala, the Razidi, Karatlas, what that way. Welcome means to me like feeling at home. Being at ease, having comfort in yourself and others.
Welcome to me means being in nature, spending time with friends and family, and then staying healthy.
So I love that. And I love how we came from feeling like we needed all this tangible physical evidence that we're working so hard to really going, okay, wait, let's talk to everybody on how it feels to be in a space as a non-English speaker or just anybody really. And I think that what got me the most was like just connection. And also having things that are more connecting, like tactile things to do at the museum, for example, right? So, and that was so funny for that to finally be an aha moment for me, because our social enterprises are sewing and farming. You can't get much more like tactile than that, and none of us speak the same. I mean, the English language speakers do, but we have Pashto, we have Burmese, Afghan, Congolese, like there's so many languages in our organization, but we all have communicated in different ways and different times through these physical actions. And then also just the connection of seeing each other.
Thanks so much, Christina. Yeah, it's great to hear that story of like how you started with one idea around language and you're like, oh, actually, before you even get to that, people need to feel welcome in this space. Like, how do we really make sure that happens first? Emily, curious to hear from you all too about like what were you all aiming to do, and how did that change over time?
Well, I think a lot of our initial change that we started going for had to do with our programming and our marketing materials and things like that, and revamping them, rebranding them, making them look new. But I actually think that we came across something that maybe was even a bit more important. And I think I'll frame this with a story. So our community partner is the Living History Foundation, who is led by Alan Mack, and he was our main point of contact for a project involving three young adult interns. We were writing an exhibit about the Buffalo Soldiers, which is Alan's area of expertise. But due to some scheduling conflicts, etc., the interns weren't actually able to meet Alan until almost the end of the project. And Alan came in, he had all of these tools and antiques and artifacts, and he went through every single one of them and he explained each one to the interns. And we just had a great time. We all laughed together. And when Alan left for the day, one of the interns turned to me and said that they were nervous about meeting Alan. They were nervous about writing this exhibit because they thought that they were walking into some highfalutin, higher academic sort of deal, and they weren't confident about their skills in it. But talking to Alan and realizing he was really down to earth and colloquial and casual, it made them feel more confident in their ability, which helped them gain some real world experience in exhibit writing and hands-on learning of some of these antiques and artifacts. So that was a really important shift for us, to shift from, marketing and getting people in the door to creating this genuine heart-to-heart connection, this very personal connection. And so I think it's more of a less of which programming we offer and more of the way that we distribute it, to foster more of an enthusiastic and engaging learning environment.
So great, Emily. And yeah, so wonderful. Alan is such a great partner to you all in thinking through those things too, which has been wonderful to see. We're gonna take some time for you all in small groups to talk to each other around this idea of thinking about something that you would like to be different for a community or community partner that you work with or care about at your site. And thinking about this from an outcomes perspective. So thinking about what might you like this partner or this community group to feel or think or know or experience differently. So we're just going to do a little bit of time in breakout rooms and then come back for the last section of the webinar. And we'll see you all in just a few minutes. You should get an invite to join one now. All right. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had some good time to talk with each other and think about the changes that you want to make in your organization too. We are going to continue with the last part of this session together, and we're going to do one more breakout room at the end of that to give you guys a chance to connect with other folks on the call. So, the first steps in this process were identifying barriers and getting really clear around the goals or the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And then the last part of this was breaking down those big desired outcomes, those big goals into actionable steps that you can take towards achieving that. So our group, I think one of the most important lessons I heard a lot of folks sharing was that it's easy to get overwhelmed with internal change, to feel like, oh my gosh, we have to change everything in the organization. It's really overwhelming at first, right? So breaking down those steps into smaller steps was really helpful, I think, for a lot of the organizations that are part of this cohort. And it makes it more manageable, but it also just helps you bring other staff and other community members on board with those changes that you're making along the way. And one tool that we shared with the cohort that we'll email out to you all as well is this action planning worksheet that we had each of the teams fill out. And that just like helped folks get on the same page as to what they were trying to do and start to identify what are some steps that need to happen towards that change, who needs to be involved in those steps, and how are decisions made as you're progressing on these steps. And getting clear about that has been really helpful with the cohort. Um, and as each organization and partner was making change, there was a lot to navigate and like, how are these changes like mutually beneficial for the community partner as well? And so that was an important question throughout this process that we were always raising. And in the last webinar, we talked a lot about reciprocal relationships and how to build reciprocity with the museum and the partner throughout this process. And we shared this definition of reciprocal partnerships that we've been working on, which is reciprocal relationships build mutual responsibility to share power, energy, strengths, and care for one another while working to mitigate imbalances. And so we've tried to center this definition as we were making internal change. And I think the way you really build that reciprocity is by working on something together. You learn a lot about each other through that process. And you share power in the decision making. You think about the decisions that you're making together and how you're going to share those steps along the way. So that's been an important part of the process in terms of this internal change. And the last thing I wanted to share with you all is the silly graphic, but it's just to say that change is really messy. It's not linear. I think you've heard from a couple partners on the call that they started with one idea and then they ended up doing another idea. And sometimes the steps that you take towards these change can feel like a step forward, and sometimes they can feel like a step back or to the side, or steps that you trip on along the way. But what's important is that like you're making these steps together and that you're doing it alongside of each other to make this change. And so I wanted to ask Christina and then Jillian, like, how did you kind of break down these like big changes into some steps, like one step at a time? What would you do to make this change? And I'll start with Christina first, and then we'll go to Jillian.
Sure. I think that what steps we took to make these changes is, well, we met a lot, and we contributed to each other in ways like the Elisabet Ney Museum has different kind of engagement with the community opportunities. Like we've done a natural dye demo and workshop at the museum and had two of our refugee team members leading that, which was so wonderful. So really incorporating our teams together and getting to know one another, those have been kind of the fundamental steps, I'd say, for the museum. They have hired a Spanish speaking person to work at the museum, which is, of course, is very important for a museum in Texas to have someone that can speak Spanish for sure and assist and offer tours in that way. And also a German speaker. So that's pretty lovely. And then incorporating kind of electronic tools for folks that do need some further assistance. But I would say really the main steps have been really ingratiating our teams together.
Thanks so much, Christina. Yeah, that's super helpful. Jillian, what are the steps that you guys are taking at the Michigan History Center?
Yeah, so I think I have like just a little bit of a story of how you can take steps forward and then kind of go backwards, and hopefully you're building up to something long term. So on the one hand, we've had a really successful project. We finished 1 year with 2 interns. Our staff has been very receptive to our education initiatives with Latinx history. We've done a few book clubs. We've done a few, presentations, that sort of stuff, offering those opportunities to staff volunteer basis. But on the other hand, you can't outrun some of the outside structural forces that contributed to the issues we were having in the first place. Latinx history is underrepresented in general in Michigan history education and scholarship. And our interns were both from the Midwest and grew up in this system where their history was marginalized. And they're both very passionate about history. And so when they started the internship, we reiterated that it was not their role to fix our museum. We explained this grant, we explained sort of the origins of this internship, but that the goal of the internship was exposure and mentorship and not a finished sort of work project. They were working on researching and developing content about Latinos in Michigan, but their role was to grow as a professional and to see if public history was something that they wanted to pursue. It wasn't really like, we need you to have this report, or we need to have all this stuff, which I did produce. I don't know if you were able to put the pictures on here, but if those slides are on here, but they found tons of great resources of going through microfilm, going through archives around Lansing, Ann Arbor, Detroit, Grand Rapids, looking for identifying what could be resources we could go to in the future for doing interpretation. But their enthusiasm for the topic and the effects of systems that they grew up in manifested in this personal pressure. So as much as we were trying not to tokenize them and to give them space to grow and to tell them, like, it's not your job to make us tell Latino history, that's our job. They were very concerned in doing this project right and perfect. They felt the weight of what they were doing. And we kept telling them, you don't have to represent for all Latinos, but they still were feeling like they needed to represent for all Latinos. And working with the youth is an invigorating experience. They have so much passion and optimism, but there is a catch-22 to that passion. They can feel like if they don't produce, they fail. They haven't had the same experiences that I have as a mid-career professional with a slew of underdeveloped and discarded projects in my wake. They really feel like we need to do this for our culture and for our history, something that they're very passionate about. And they've had that pressure of feeling that they were speaking for all Latinos in Michigan, no matter how we were trying to frame this project for them and how we were trying to frame for the internship. We were very lucky to have interns that were very generous with sharing their feelings, and I'm so appreciative to their openness, the fact that they were even willing to kind of have these discussions with us. I'm not quite sure what the solution to this is, at least in the short term. I believe that as our museum collections and exhibits become more inclusive, and we have more of a cohort of intern alums that we can kind of call on to also mentor these new interns, that we will start to gain headway against some of these systemic forces, that like they will start feeling the idea of welcoming, right? Like no matter how much we say it, it's till our space and our collections and we have this legacy of being welcoming. I think that will help. But I would welcome any insight on how we might mitigate these efforts and forces. So at the end of this, when you all get to ask questions, if anyone has comments on this, I would love to hear it. And something too that I wanted to kind of touch on, sorry if you're hearing background noise, we have a party setting up in the background here. something that we're thinking about. So the second half of this grant, we'll start working on an external change, but we want to continue this relationship building phase because something that we are really concerned about and our community partners are concerned about is what happens if there's a personnel shakeup, right? At the community partner level, but also in our organization. Right now, we have these great individual relationships with members of our staff and members with LEAD, with Delia, with the interns, but it's not center wide yet. It's not, in their organizations, it's not yet. What happens if Delia moves to a different university or Toby, our museum director, moves on to another opportunity? We need to spread the love across these communities and organizations. So although we're going to be focusing on the external change, we're still going to be trying to take some of these internal change lessons and continue to work on them moving forward.
Thanks so much, Jillian. There is like so much goodness in what you just shared, and a good reminder that, sometimes at an institution you feel an overwhelm to change things, but also the community that you're trying to include more feels that same sense of overwhelm of like, oh, there's so much to share around this, like so much to change. So it's hard to navigate that. We are gonna send you all into breakout rooms one last time and then come back for some questions and just general reflections and lessons learned. But when I send you all into breakout rooms this time, would love for you all to think about the kind of outcome you discussed in that previous breakout room, the changes that you've discussed, and think about for you, what is like one action step you could make towards making that change? And this will just be a very brief room, and then we'll all come back together. So you should get an invite to join a room now. All right. Welcome back, y'all. I hope you had some good time one-on-one with each other. Thanks so much for joining us and talking about the steps, and I hope that was helpful framing to think about the steps that you're going to take. The last thing that we wanted to do is to share from the partners on the call just one lesson learned. We learned a lot of lessons along the way, but just one lesson that they feel like is really important to share with everyone on the call, and then we'll hold space for questions. And I'll turn it to Jillian to share your one lesson learned first.
Yeah, I think go slow to go fast. I think, the biggest takeaway from this grant process for a lot of, I think all the organizations, especially ours, is, focus on relationship building, focus on getting to know everyone and understanding where they're at. And that way you can find out both the organization's strengths and where, you can learn from each other at the same time. So very happy to have that space, especially within a grant, because a lot of times when you get grant money, it's like you got to spend it all in 1 year and kind of have to throw it all together. And so it's very nice to be in a project that's very intentional with that slow focus on slowly building relationships.
That's great. Christina, any lessons you want to share?
I think a lesson I've taken is to really dig into the different ways that you can be in community with your partners. And so I was sharing how the Elisabet Ney Museum is now a pickup spot for our CSA organic vegetables. And that came together just like, oh, wow, of course we should do this together. And so just digging into really looking at all the different aspects of your programming and how can we incorporate each other into some of those things.
That's great. And Emily, any final lessons learned from you?
Yeah, I think we learned a lot about being adaptable to unexpected changes and extenuating circumstances, unconventional circumstances. We've had a lot of different scheduling conflicts, big life events, things like that as we've been working through this project. But I think that that's kind of one of the things that strengthened our bond is having to navigate this stuff and build each other up. And I think that we've really fostered a lot of trust in each other and reliance upon each other through having to come up with sort of some creative solutions to unconventional problems.
Oh, those are great. And all three of you kind of center the relationship building as such an important part of all of those lessons learned in the change process. For the folks on the call, we wanted to just say thank you for coming and for joining us and being part of the webinar. It's really an honor to share some of the work of the cohort with you all, and we're still learning along the way. So nice to share what we're learning so far, and wanted to just open the space up for any questions that you all had or any comments that you have, and that's it. Yeah. And Elisabet, thanks for joining us too. Elisabet's one of our partners in the cohort.
My pleasure. This has been really fascinating. Thank you.
Do you think you'll be facilitating any other relationships like this, or could we come to the Sites of Conscience to help us to figure out how to address some of the engagement issues?
Yeah, absolutely, Melinda. Thanks to the grant from IMLS, we're gonna create a toolkit around all the lessons we're learning around this and share that with the field. That'll be like a free accessible toolkit. We paused kind of halfway through this process to do these webinars, but at the end of this, we're going to do another series of webinars next summer. So in the summer of 2025, that's when we'll do another series to share the work of this project and the toolkit. And then, Melinda, we are always have opportunities for folks to work with us to learn more about the community engagement practices too. So we can chat one-on-one too to talk about that. And then the last thing that I'll share with you, and I can share this in an email following up, is that we're doing the Sites of Conscience is doing an online training too this October on co-creating with community members. So it's going to share some of the things that we're talking about here, but it's a chance to really dive deep into that. And so I'll put a link in the chat and then follow up with you around that too. That's open to anybody to join. Good question. Oh, Lavina, thanks for coming. It's so nice to see you again and appreciate you being here. All right. Any other questions? Or Hannah, you're also representing the Brush Square Museums. If you have any other things you wanted to share too, you're welcome to.
I think this was great. I have loved sitting in on all of the discussions about this. Some of the stories I'd heard before, some of them I hadn't, but it's just so encouraging to hear about all the different types of work that are happening at all of the sites. So thank you for letting me be here.
Thanks so much for being here. Well, we'll close out our call, but just wanted to say a lot of gratitude for the partners who are sharing their stories and helping all of us learn, and for you all for joining us and participating. And I'll follow up with you with an email to a link to all of the organizations that are part of this call, the slides from today, and the materials that I said that I would share in the chat. I'll share that out afterwards. But thank you all so much for being here, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.